Okay, we're on 2008 Enterprise Server, and today we want to set up Active Directory. So I'm going to go ahead and log in, and my beautiful 3-year-old daughter Sarah is with me. Sarah, say hi. Sarah, what do pirates say? What do they say? Arr. All right. Um, in this case, Sarah wanted me to name the server after her, so we named the server Sarah. She wanted it to be a pretty name, and she's a very pretty girl, I must say. Okay, logged in here. Now, first thing I want to do, I want to make this a little bit more homely, if that's the right word. In other words, a little more comfortable to me. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Classic View under Control Panel. I want to go ahead and go here. I'm going to go to Classic Start Menu. I want to add the log off to the Start Menu. I want to get rid of the personalized menus, which I don't like. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to close this. And I want to go over here to my computer. Right-click Properties, Advanced System Settings. I'm going to want to go over here to Advanced and adjust for best performance instead of appearance. I don't understand. You just don't really need a beautiful shell or fancy graphics on a server product. I can understand on a workstation or a production machine, but the purpose of this is going to be a domain controller, to set it on the network, not to have a nice looking graphical interface, but to perform server functions and do them efficiently and well. So in this case, I think that's a nice option, just to be able to set it for performance. One of the things we want to do is take a look at our IP settings, and I'll tell you why. IP config all. Let's go up here, and we can tell that here we're set for DHCP. There's our DHCP server 192.168.82.54. So we can see that we're on a Class C subnet. It's a private Class C network. We're subnetting on the third octet. There's 24 bits for our network address, 8 bits for our host. With the domain controller, you never want a static IP address. You don't want IPs to change. When records are created in DNS, SRV records, and A records, you want them to always map to the same IP address. So it's never a good idea to allow your domain controllers to have a dynamic IP. Give it a static IP. For that matter, even your member servers should not have dynamic IP addresses. They should have static IPs. We'll talk about a member server in just a moment. You could get around this if you have a DHCP server and you configured a MAC reservation. I suppose you could get around it that way. That way the same MAC address or server domain controller will always get the same IP address. But it's just better to give it a static IP. So let's do that. We'll go to networks, and this is not just domain controllers, but any server. If it's an Internet Information Services web server, if it's an FTP server, DHCP server, routing remote access server, VPN server, NAT network address translation server. In this case, I'm going to uncheck IP version 6. We're not using that. And for IP version 4, I'm going to add my static address. It was a private Class C 192.168, subnetted in the third octet to 80. And 2 was what was leased to me by DHCP, so I'll just go ahead and use that as a static address, 192.168. That way we know we won't get an IP conflict. And for my gateway, I want to go ahead and go out 1. Now, I'm going to allow, when we set up Active Directory and I run DC-Promo, I'm going to allow it to use, to set up DNS for me. So what you want to do is configure the server to be a DNS server to itself. And I can provide an alternate 168.80.81 to go to other networks or resolve other host names. So I'm going to go ahead and close that, and now I've modified my network settings. Now, you may ask, what's the difference between a domain controller and a member server? A member server is pretty much just a workstation, but with extra services. So, I may have a 2008 server set up that runs as a standalone web server, Internet Information Services server, a standalone certificate services server, a VPN server, NAT server, routing remote access server, whatever, DHCP, you name it. But it's, in this case, if I don't run DC Promo on it and it doesn't become a domain controller, it's not an integral part of Active Directory. It would act like a workstation with extra services. And so if I were to do that, it would look like this. Sarah's the computer name or the server name, and then some domain would be the domain I would join. And if I did it this way, then this would just be a member server. It would not be a domain controller. It would not be Active Directory. But that's not what we want today. Today we do want to create Active Directory. So we're going to go down here. We've got our static IP address, everything set up. Kept a static hunkadory, got our host name. Now here's the deal. You don't want to change your host name after you run DC promo. That creates all kinds of horrible problems. Microsoft allowed that in 2003. They didn't used to allow that in 2000. Once you ran DC promo, you had to demote your domain controller to be able to change the host name. They decided to allow that in 2003, but boy, it created more problems than it was worth. So many people would run DC promo and have all these SRV records and a global catalog or DNS, and then they would go change the host name of a domain controller, and just it would create problems finding it and replication problems and things like that. So my advice to you is figure out what you want to name your domain controller first, and then run DC promo. Don't change the name afterwards. And also remember, it's that way with a certificate services server. Once you set up certificate services, you can't change the host name of the server until you uninstall certificate services. And that is just a security precaution to prevent counterfeits. In this case, we'll run DC promo from the command prompt. I'm going to go through here. I could use advanced mode installation, but I want to use the wizard in this example. Now I have several options. If I had an existing forest, I could add a domain controller to an existing domain. And what that would do is I could either add it as a replicant at the same level, and it would serve as sort of a fault-tolerant or load-balancing domain controller in case that one failed, or I could create a new domain in an existing forest, and that could be a new domain tree, or even a subdomain of a previous domain controller or domain tree. In this case, we have not set up Active Directory, so I'm going to want to create a new domain in a new forest. I'm going to click on that. I'll go next. Now, here it's asking me to put in my fully qualified domain name. And the way that works is, let's use Microsoft as an example. If I start out at the right here, this is the most general part of the FQDN, or the address. And this is the most specific part. So what would happen is, out there on the internet, there are, after IANA, there are top-level DNS servers that have things like .com and .org and .mil, and they resolve, in turn, to DNS servers, in this case, that have an IP address for Microsoft's DNS servers. And then Microsoft's DNS servers would resolve to IP addresses for things like World Wide Web, or FTP, or Training, or Partner1, or MCP, or something like that. TechNet. So it would just, as you move from right to left, you go from more general to the more specific. So that's how that works on the internet. Now, how that would work in a forest or a domain, my host name would be to the far left. So here is Sarah. And then if I were in a subdomain, Caribbean, sorry, I meant to put a dot there, Caribbean, and then Pirates, and then ARG. And so this would be my forest name. This would be my domain tree or parent domain name, my subdomain name, and my host name. Again, the more general to the right, and then as I go from right to left, I get more and more specific until I actually get down to the host or the server's name. Now I just want to create the name of my forest in this case. So the FQDN of the forest root domain, I'm just going to set it up to be pirates.arrrgh, ARG. And we'll go with that. Checking to see whether the new forest name is already in use. I'm going to let the wizard set up DNS. Now DNS is paramount and very important in addition to a static IP address. You can't have Active Directory without DNS. You need A records, pointer records, and SRV records to be able to map services and to enable workstations and other servers to be able to find the global catalog server. When we set this particular domain controller up, remember it's going to hold all 5 of those operations master roles. So it'll be a RID master that hands out SIDs. It'll be a PD simulator that emulates the primary domain controller in the old NT setting, as well as controlling the timing for replication. It'll be the schema master controlling the schema, which is the scaffolding or the class structure of Active Directory that can be modified if you have schema admin privileges. It'll be the infrastructure master and the domain naming master to ensure that there are no conflicts or duplicate domain names within the forest. Here's my forest functional level. Notice there are 3. This would be the most compatible if I were mixing 2000, 2003, 2008 servers, but it gives me the least amount of new 2008 features. Now, this of course would give me the most 2008 features, but that would limit my ability to be backwards compatible with older server operating systems. So I'm going to go with the default forest functional level of 2000. We can always upgrade that later and raise the forest functional and domain functional level. Same thing with the domain functional level. Again, to be more compatible, I can stay with 2000 native, but if I want to use some of the newer services and capabilities in 2008, I would have to raise that functional level. And again, I can always choose to do that later. I'm going to click on Next. It's going to try to examine my DNS configuration. Now, at this point, I don't have a DNS configuration. I haven't configured any, zones or information yet. Matter of fact, we probably should have looked at that, and then we could have, compared it in contrast to what DNS looked like before and what DNS looked like after Active Directory. But I'll let the wizard go ahead and set that up for me. Let's see. Let's go over here. Let's go over here. Let's go over here. And okay. Alright, good. So right now we have no DNS set up. We're ready. We're going to let the wizard install DNS for us. This is checked. We need a DNS server. This is going to be by default a global catalog, and it'll hold all 5 operations master roles. As once we get Active Directory set up, the forest, the domain tree, and the first domain controller, we can add additional domain controllers as replicants or in other domains, and then we can start moving operations master roles off to other servers, 2008 servers, to balance the load or do load balancing. Delegation for this DNS server cannot be created because the authoritative parent zone cannot be found or does not run Windows DNS server. In this case, that's because there is no, DNS server, no DNS zone information set up. In this case, we don't have to worry about that. This is our very first domain controller, in our forest, and our very first domain tree. So we're going to let Active Directory and the Active Directory wizard set that up for us. Several things happen. These are the default settings when you run DC promo. In this case, it creates ntds.dit, which holds the Active Directory database, and sysvol, in this case, which is a shared folder that allows replication of group policy and other shared projects in the Kerberos encrypted replication process. I'm going to go ahead and click on Next and Password. This requires my administrative password on install. So now once I set up Active Directory, right now this is coming from the local security account manager, and let's take a look at that real quick, because this will be a change that you'll notice. And okay, let me do this. I had an out of local users and groups here. Okay, now I have local users and groups capability right now, but after I finish or complete the DC promo process and set up Active Directory, I won't have local users and groups. I'll just have Active Directory users. It'll be the same on the local machine as well as for any other domain controller out there on all of Active Directory, because it centralizes authentication into a central database. So right now I'm using the password, in this case for administrator, and I'm not going to reset it, but it's just our cryptic password. But remember that this option here will fade away once Active Directory is installed, and there will not be local users and groups. There'll just be Active Directory, so to speak. But that's the password that I want to use here. So all right, we're going to go ahead and move forward here. In this case, let's watch what goes on, waiting for DNS installation to finish. It's going to go ahead and set up the DNS server. And once it sets up the DNS server, it's going to configure the zones, and in this case, by default, they'll be Active Directory integrated with the appropriate A records. That'll map a forward lookup, so it'll resolve a host name to an IP. Reverse lookup zones will pointer records that will map IPs to host names, and server records that will map out the services in DNS. generally when you have a problem running DC promo or setting up Active Directory, it comes from DNS. There are several other issues. If you try to set it up on a non-NTFS partition, it's not going to work because it needs the access control entries on the DACL that are provided by that NTFS partition. If you don't have enough hard drive space to configure the ntdf.dit Active Directory database, that could be a problem. If you for some reason can't create the shared sysvol folder, which allows you to replicate group policy and shared objects, that could be a problem. There could be security issues. Sure, there are plenty of things that can go wrong in DC promo, but in my experience, my humble experience, it's generally DNS. A lot of times you have DNS issues. If something goes wrong with DNS or you don't have DNS set up properly, that's probably what you want to look at in terms of creating Active Directory, setting up domain controllers, promoting them. Another common problem is hosts or servers being out of synchronization with each other. If they're in different time zones or they have different clock settings, you may have a hard time trying to join one domain controller to another or to Active Directory because the PD simulator takes over the function of trying to synchronize the timing. Remember that replication conflicts are resolved by a timestamp as well as a serial number. For that timestamp to be accurate, all those domain controllers have to be synchronized. And that could also be a problem. You may end up having to put servers or machines in different locations in the same time zone, or synchronize the clocks on those machines, or at least allow the PD simulator to synchronize those things so that replication can take place. In this case, it's writing the Active Directory partition. Now, this is not like a file system partition like we're thinking of or like we've been talking about, but this is basically just it's a section of one partition, a folder, so to speak, or part of the Active Directory database where it's creating all of these objects. And it uses Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, or LDAP context. So you'll notice domain component, canonical name or common name, domain component. And that's also the way all of the the new command line tools introduced with 2003 and on into 2008 functional work. A lot of times you'll have to supply an LDAP string, common name CN equals a username or a group, and then what subdomain and domain and forest it's in. So that would be DC equals Caribbean, DC equals pirate, DC equals arg, as an example. It would be the FQDN, but broken up into sort of an LDAP string or LDAP statement, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. Completing Active Directory Domain Services Installation Wizard. Active Directory is now installed, so I'm going to go ahead and click on Finish. And we will go ahead and restart and allow this process to complete. Okay, we're going to log back in. We've completed DC Prema and we've rebooted and see some of our changes. Now notice in this case, here's our domain, pirates, and we no longer have that log on locally option. In this case, we just log into the domain. So that has been modified or changed in our 2008 server. There's no local logon and there's no real local users and groups. Now there's just Active Directory users and computers. So I'm going to go over here. Well, I guess I better let 2008 finish booting up here. Now, some people like the server manager screen that pops up. There's a lot of neat little snap-ins here. I gotta get my hourglass to go away. Things that you would normally find like in the client management consoles. But I'm gonna go ahead and check this. Do not show me this console at logon, just because kind of get that out of the way there. Okay. Waiting for all snap-ins to complete. What I want to do real quick is Let's go look at our computer ID, and we'll see what some of the things that have changed. See, now we're in a domain called pirates.org, and our FQDN, or fully qualified domain name, is our hostname sarah.pirates.org. And in this case, I can't change domains because I'm a domain controller. This is grayed out, and being a domain controller, I'd have to run DC promo and demote myself before I would be able to change domains. Go ahead and close that. Let's look at some other changes. Let me go to Control Panel real quick. We'll make a few shortcuts to make things easier to find. I'm going to go to Administrative Tools. And in Administrative Tools, let me size all columns to fit real quick. Active Directory Domains and Trust, Active Directory Sites and Services, and Active Directory Users and Computers. These are our three main tools. There's lots of other tools that have been added. Let's copy DNS to, let's see, anything else. I want to copy anything else there. And that'll be it for now. Okay. Okay, so now when I want to add a user, I have Active Directory Users and Computers. And here's my domain, pirates.org. Computer accounts I want to add, user accounts I want to add. And if I wanted to make, here's some of the objects I can make, users. If I want to, in this domain, at this level, I can create an organizational unit. I can create groups, users. Again, remember the OU was added after NT, but that gives you the ability to kind of get around having to have unnecessary subdomains. I can add an OU if I want to say organizational unit. Daytona, and I'll add another one. Let's see, someplace far away. Daytona, Seattle. And if I want to, I can delegate control of that OU to a user I've added in Active Directory Users and Computers. And it would be as if it were a subdomain, because that I could set that administrator up so that he or she would only have permission to add objects, modify and delete things, and apply group policy in that OU, and not anyone else's OU. So I'd have a Daytona admin and a Seattle admin. That's an example of the delegate control wizard. Now, another thing that you can do, if I check advanced features here, see how it's checked? If I don't, you can't get the DACL for your OUs, Discretionary Access Control List. But if you do, it works just like a folder. Now, with the advanced view enabled, I'll right-click. Now I actually have a DACL. So there's a security tab, and I have access control entries in a DACL. And if I were to go to advanced permissions, auditing, I have a very fine level of control, so I can fine-tune permissions on an OU, and pretty much for all intents and purposes make that a replacement for unnecessary subdomains. Now there are still reasons to create subdomains. If you have differing security policies, or password policies, say like one domain wants password complexity, another domain wants simple passwords or something, or if the nature of the company is that there's a subdivision that's completely different from some other part of the company, yeah, sure, you can create subdomains, but Microsoft recommends against creating too many. So that OU is a nice option, that organizational unit. Want to look at Active Directory Users and Computers, we also want to look at DNS. Notice DNS wasn't there before. I went to Control Panel and showed you, but let's look and see what that wizard has done. It's created for us a zone here, and we'll look at the zone type. Let's go over here. And this is an Active Directory integrated zone. And it's already configured secure dynamic updates to assist us or protect us from DNS server cache poisoning. But in pirates.org, there's an A record for Sarah, mapping the host name Sarah to 192.168.82. That's our IP. And if we were to go in, not only are there A records, but there are SRV records, or service records, added. As a global catalog server, here's Sarah and pirates.org. Kerberos password server, lightweight directory access protocol server. We have all of these, SRV records here mapping out different types of services and information in Active Directory. This is paramount, or very important, that this happens correctly when you run DC Promo, If anything goes wrong here and we don't get adequate information in our Active Directory integrated DNS zone, then when you add other domain controllers and even join workstations to the domain, they won't be able to find the services they need to perform, different functions on the network. So that's it. We've taken a standalone 2008 enterprise server. We looked at making it a member server, and we talked about the differences between that and a domain controller. We gave it a static IP address. We ran DC promo, and the wizard went through and configured Active Directory, the Active Directory database, made all of the changes necessary for this domain controller to function. One more thing I'll do. Good. Notice, again, here's that sysfall folder. And that's shared out along with net logon. And here is all, here would be different group policies. And group policy, it'll take us a while. We'll save that for another day. It's quite a involved subject. But we'll open up some management consoles and load the local security policy, the domain controller, default domain controller policy, default domain policy, and look at group policy. There's so much you can do with it. But just be aware, in the back of your mind, kind of store this, that this is where those policies are stored, and this is how they get replicated from server to server. These shares here on different domain controllers.